Hello, men and women. In this video, I'll be taking the Mastodon through the frozen wasteland of the Ymir Cosmodrome to repair, rescue, and recover the 605R. While I do that, I'll be going over the history of their real-life counterparts, the MAZ 543 and 537, going over a little bit of Soviet and Cold War history, and taking a deep dive into their in-game models. So sit back and relax. Let's dive into these Soviet behemoths. I was warned that finding information on these trucks is somewhat difficult, and it was. But I think I did a pretty okay job. Not to stroke my own ego, but from what I've looked up myself, this video could potentially be the largest collection of information on these trucks in English on YouTube. So if you liked it, or learned something new, please give it a like for me. I would appreciate it. This video idea was voted on by you guys, getting a pretty massive 46% of the vote. I use the YouTube community post feature a decent bit, so if you want to stay up to date on projects, vote in polls, and argue with random strangers on the internet, consider subscribing. I'd recommend keeping the notification bell on, since I only upload about once every month. Anyway, onto the video. It should be a pretty straight shot up the main road, since I did the warehouse skip and already have the garage in the Cosmodrome unlocked. But Ymir already gave me a little taste of how hard it could kick me in the nuts while I was trying to clear the gateway to get here, so I'm expecting the worst. The Tatran will be nearby as a support truck in case I need some help, but I would consider that a defeat, so it's a last resort. Let's get this journey underway. I didn't clear the landslide in front of the garage, so feeling brazen, I got to experience what it was like to get 4 of the Mastodon's 8 wheels off the ground. I usually try to drive pretty immersive. I like to follow the rules, but I'm not taking any of Ymir's shit today. With the largest engine upgrade and 61-inch tires, this was barely even a challenge for the Mastodon. Now, the Mastodon can equip almost every add-on in the game. I personally use it as a flatbed and high saddle hauler, but for this task, I'm throwing the multi-purpose cargo unit on it. This is a niche add-on that I rarely use, but I think it looks particularly good on this truck. Plus, I need the extra fuel and repair points to get the 605R up and running again. So let's clear something up straight away, especially for those that just like to put my videos on and listen. These trucks are both unlicensed, so unfortunately they have different fake names from their real-life counterparts, which can make talking and writing about them a big pain in the ass. The game calls this the Zix 612H, or Mastodon. In real life, it is the MAZ 543, or the Hurricane. While Mastodon and Hurricane are objectively much cooler, for the sake of research, correctness, and writing, this is the 543. And the 543 is unlike any truck I've talked about before, because first and foremost, it was a weapons platform. Sure, the Tatran technically used to be a light armored infantry fighting vehicle, link to that video down below, but the Tatran wasn't armed with nukes. If you know anything about the 543, it's that in most pictures, it's carrying a massive ICBM on its back. Most famously, it was known for carrying the Scud and R-17 Elbrus missiles, and if that doesn't mean anything to you, don't worry, me neither. But 2 of those missiles would have been enough to turn Chicago into Fallout 3. At the end of World War II, Russia's economy was in shambles. They had suffered enormous losses both in combat and in the civilian population. In fact, throughout the entirety of World War II, no country had suffered more losses than the Soviet Union, losing roughly 24 million people. Nearly a quarter of its industry, including factories and resources, had been destroyed during the fighting. While the country's citizens were hoping for reconciliation and relaxation, Stalin was worried that their country would get swallowed up by the West if they showed any kind of economic or military weakness. Essentially, he min-maxed the country like a game of Civ, focusing on industrialization and military mobilization at all cost, technologically advancing the country nearly 80 years in just a few decades. Don't think I'm glazing Stalin for this. It came at the cost of oppression and demoralizing the population, quite literally working them to death. I mean, hell, the MAZ factory was built using German slave labor, so don't miss the point here. The point I'm trying to make is that this era of rapid advancement up the tech tree is why so many legendary trucks came out of the Soviet Union during this time. The GAZ-66, the Tatra T-813, the Kraz 255, the ZIL 135, and of course, the MAZ 543 and 537. They had these pragmatic designs, putting utility and function above all else. When the Soviets made a vehicle, they needed it to be simple. they needed it to be durable, and they needed it to be extremely effective. And none were more so than the 1965 MAZ 543, a vehicle so robust, durable, and flexible, it was being produced all the way up until 2004. In the 50s, the Soviets were looking for something better to haul around and launch their missiles and warheads, something that would be faster and smoother than the tracked transporter erector launcher systems it had been using previously. Tank tracks generally aren't very smooth, and the last thing you want to do is shake the nuclear baby. So, the prototypes for the 543 entered production in the late 50s, and after a few failed revisions because the truck was too small for the types of missiles they wanted it to carry, in 1962, a design was accepted by the government after being developed in secret and entered full mass production in 1965. The vehicle they came up with was a 42,000-pound, 38-foot-long monster, powered by a World War II tank engine, a 38.8-liter diesel V12, making 525 horsepower and around 1,600 foot-pounds of torque, mounted to a 4-speed transmission. This powerhouse was situated directly in between the two cockpits. This unique design helped cut down the truck's overall length, which in turn helped reduce weight, which was important because fully loaded with its destructive payload, this truck could weigh as much as 96,000 pounds, getting a fantastic 3 miles to the gallon out of its 114-gallon fuel tanks, giving it the range of your average car at 342 miles, but using about 6 times as much fuel to do it. Now, of course, because nothing is ever easy in a MUR, some pissed-off native decided that dumping a load of trees in the middle of the road was the appropriate response to someone calling him an ethnic slur. I don't care, and can just as easily go around. The water was almost too high, but I would have happily taken on water damage because nothing on this earth could convince me to equip the 543's disgusting snorkels.
That's a load of crap.
The 543 was designed first and foremost for carrying missiles and rockets around. Once that had been achieved, like any vehicle the USSR made, it could become a beast of burden for whatever you needed it to do. There was of course versions that carried radar installations, mobile command centers, enormous artillery guns for coastal defense. I wish I could find a video of one of these firing, I bet it would be so cool. Cranes, and simple flatbed models. Most interestingly to me are the versions that could be mobile barracks, acting not just as troop transport but also facilities if they were deployed in remote regions for long periods of time. They'd have beds and little meeting rooms / eating areas. The 543 was such an enormous truck that you could nearly fit an American mobile home on the back of it. Imagine living out of one of these things for weeks or months at a time, sleeping, showering, and eating in the back of a tank-powered RV. Several 543s were turned into military and commercial airfield trucks, which is what the in-game truck's water tank is based on. So while I'm upset I can't just put fuel in it, since that gets substantially more use than the water tanks do, I'm at least thankful we have a real-life add-on put into the game. The heavy fuel semi-trailer we have in-game is based on a real trailer, and can be seen being towed around by 543s on airfields to refuel planes. I wish that trailer got more use in-game. I love the way it looks. It's so weird that the first one you find is in Michigan and then you don't see one again for quite a while. As the 543s became obsolete and fell out of military service, they were purchased by other companies to be loggers and dump trucks. But they're not very common because of the enormous fuel consumption. MAZ's official website says a lot of them found use in landfills, which is just kind of sad, actually. Also, you've probably noticed a few of the pictures I've shown only have one cockpit instead of the two divided ones. That would be the 543M. It's mechanically identical, it just sports a different weapon system, and for some reason they decided to just lop one of the cockpits off and leave more room for engine access. Although this one looks like it has room for more crew on the back. I've always loved the 543. Something about its design. Even being 60 years old, it still somehow looks futuristic. It looks like something you'd see in a video game. It's a doomsday vehicle that looks tough enough to survive the apocalypse it was designed to bring, solving a problem in a completely sensible but unexpected way. Our truck is too long and heavy. Cut the cab in half and stick the motor in between it. Sounds like an idea that would get immediately rejected, but the Soviets just did it. So I'm getting closer to the 605R, and I saw an area where I could shave approximately 1 minute off my travel time by cutting through a small area that connected the two trails. Apparently, I had forgotten the lesson Amr taught me earlier, so it taught it to me again. Explore off the beaten path if you want a beaten ass. If it wasn't for the twin-motor winch and a suspicious amount of dead trees, I would have needed to be pulled out by the Tatran, and enlisting it to play rescue again would have made me feel like less of a man. My time-saving shortcut turned into 5 minutes of hopelessly winching my way through this relatively small frozen field. The 543 isn't unstoppable. It's good to be humbled every now and then, I guess. Continuing on, the 605R is so close I can almost taste it. Or maybe that's the air that tastes like pennies. The 543 represents an interesting time in world history. It's hard to imagine two world superpowers being posed to completely wipe each other out, quite literally pointing their nuclear arsenal at each other, fingers vigilantly hovering over doomsday buttons if the other side had even a sneaking suspicion. While the US was playing defense, building in-ground silos all across the country, the Soviet Union went on offense, flexing its military might by making its ICBMs mobile. Imagine, before the information age of satellites and spy drones, that you spot a 543 with an ICBM posed to launch just in the middle of a field, and by the time you report back and mobilize, it's just gone. It drove away. Remember that video?
The missile knows where it is at all times. It knows this because it knows where it isn't.
Well, you don't know where it is, because it can be anywhere that it just wasn't. Granted, they weren't going anywhere fast. Unloaded, they have a top speed of 35 miles an hour, but still, the idea of a nuke just driving away, it made sweat bead up on the foreheads of American generals. The United States was terrified of this thing, having 222 declassified CIA documents mentioning it by name. Oh yeah, I was really vibing with the Cold War espionage theme and went diving through CIA docs for information. We'll talk more about that later. Now, if you've recovered the 605R before, you may have been watching the video in horror, or maybe morbid curiosity. For those who don't know, like I didn't, the final 50 feet to get to the 605R is a path that is absolutely not made for large trucks. There is a way around if you have something that can climb a very steep but short incline, but the 543 has far too large of an overhang. So this path is way too small for the 543, nevertheless one of the largest trucks in the game. But I wasn't going to let that stop me from trying. The first issue is the sheer angle of the slope. It's not very tall, but it's aggressive, and the 543, like I said, has a decent nose overhang. Once again, the twin-motor winch came in clutch to pull this enormous truck up the grade, but the next obstacle was a bit more difficult. A tree stump, making the 543 just barely too wide for the path. There was no way I was squeezing in between it, so naturally I tried going wide to go around it. I got stuck at first, but being able to literally see the 605R from where I was meant there was no way in hell I could give up. So I just kinda did whatever you would call this. I used the steers to just drive up the stump. I had a sketchy moment where I got the Mastodon on 2 wheels. No, like actually 2 wheels, not 4, 2. But I mean, I did it. I usually drive so conservatively. I try not to do things you wouldn't actually do, but sometimes just mashing the gas and bullying the game is fun. And there it is, SnowRunner's holy grail, the 605R. Now before I drive the 605R back to the garage, let's take the time to take a closer look at the 543's model. The first thing I noticed is this antenna clipping through the roof rack. Literally unplayable. I do want to put out the impressive attention to detail that's put into this truck's steering architecture. You can really see the detail of all the linkages and how it works. Like, they really didn't have to go that hard, but the devs did, and I appreciate that. One thing I noticed about the multi-purpose cargo unit add-on, there's a little chimney on top of it. The idea behind these little maintenance add-ons is that they're like sheds. You're able to work inside them if you needed to. I want to say this little chimney could be mounted on top of the maintenance unit to provide ventilation if you were welding or like running a propane heater. But I don't see a spot on the unit itself where the chimney would actually go. But I'm not here to nitpick the damn add-ons. Now for the part we've all been waiting for, the interior. Let's talk about everything else before we actually dive into the cockpit, starting with what's behind the driver. It's a very tiny backseat with almost no legroom, and you get to share your limited space with 2 of the truck's compressed air tanks. At least, that's what my Google Lens translated the text to. The passenger side of the truck has no real interesting details. It's just a low-res, low-poly version of the driver's side. Except there is a difference. In the back, there's 2 fire extinguishers instead of air tanks. And yes, there is a low-poly model of a V12 directly in between the 2 cockpits. It's somewhat accurate to the real thing. But the devs even went as far as to model the 2 massive radiator fans, despite there being no way to see them. Supposedly, the passenger side cockpit is hinged, so it can fold forward like a cab over truck to get engine access. So did you think the engine was inside of this big enclosure behind the cab? Me too, especially because the exhaust comes out right underneath it. So truth be told, I can't get a straight answer on what this is. So if you know, let us know. I've seen one thread on a model building website of all places that it's just an auxiliary storage compartment. It has storage for the passenger's gear and houses some auxiliary equipment for the truck. I've seen another thread that said it was the place where all the air and hydraulic equipment and the batteries sat for the missile platforms, which seems possible. Alright, onto the driver's seat. The first thing I noticed, this is the same panel that was in the GAZ 66. Devs just reusing assets or actually reused parts? Potentially both. This interior has a lot of levers. There's this one next to the driver's seat, there's this one pointed down at the floor, and there's this one a little bit farther in front of it. What do these do? Let's see if I found out. I wrote this section before I finished all of my research. I didn't. The side windows can be opened. They're hinged at the bottom, so you just unlatch them and they fold outwards. There's a similar lever on the roof that's to control the spotlight. I noticed there's curtains on every single window in both of the front cockpits. These are most likely dual purpose, to keep the cockpit dark if the driver had to do something during a night op, and to block off the interior if the truck was ever parked around civilians. The big lever coming out of the floor is of course the parking brake. The lever on the right side of the steering wheel is the gear selector, and the lever on the left side is for your low gears. The steering shaft is cushioned, most likely to protect the driver's knees due to the lack of legroom. Unfortunately, for having one of the most interesting cab designs in the game, there isn't a whole lot interesting going on with the dash. There's lots of unlabeled lights and buttons, and what is labeled is exactly what you would expect it to be. Nothing too interesting. You know, oil pressure, air pressure, fuel, temp, etc. But I can see that the in-game 543 has 13,502 kilometers and 1,700 operating hours. Alright, time to get the 605R back to the garage. Now again, unlicensed truck. It's actually called the 537, and that's what I'll be calling it for the rest of the video. I really wish there was a mod to prevent cosmetic damage, because I just don't want to get cinematic shots of this pruning old man. I mean, it's so broken my arm is clipping through the door. The 537 is a beast of a truck. Developed in conjunction with the 543, it shares a lot of the same components and bones. It's powered by the exact same 38.8 liter V12 tank engine, but it has a 3-speed gearbox instead of a 4-speed. It was primarily designed as a prime mover, to haul tanks, artilleries, and rockets or ICBMs around. In game, the 537 is nearly one of the best all-around trucks you can have in your fleet. It has amazing tires, a really high power to weight ratio, and since you can fit a roof rack on it, it becomes either the ultimate self-sustaining hauler or a ridiculously overpowered repair and refuel truck with how much it can carry. The 537 is often confused with the 535, a slightly shorter version of the 537. I mean, look at it, it's so cute. The 537 was given a longer wheelbase to provide room for its more complex drivetrain. A drivetrain that is mostly exposed, which means we can really explore it. Now the 543 has the exact same drivetrain, but the 537's is much more visible and easier to talk about. I was going to try and explain this with words, but thankfully I found this super helpful diagram on a scale model website. I spend a surprising amount of time on scale model websites when I'm researching Soviet vehicles. Might be a hobby I'll get into when I can afford the crippling debt it will inevitably bring on. But I mean, look at these. It's like 40K minis for my specific brand of autism. The 537 and 543 aren't set up like your typical truck. I mean, most Soviet trucks aren't, but I get excited when I get to learn something new. As opposed to having the transmission mounted directly on the engine outputs first to a reduction gearbox. Essentially, it makes it so that the output shaft going to the gearbox isn't a 1-to-1 ratio to the engine RPMs. It slows the rotation down while maintaining the torque output. How? I don't know, gearboxes are like magic to me. Basically planetary gears, but this really isn't the video to explain how they work. Then it goes to the transfer case, then to 2 more gearboxes that again reduce input speed and increase torque output before going to their respective axles. I'm really glad I found this diagram because I was looking at the 537's model and it just didn't make sense to me because the in-game model is missing this drive shaft. It's supposed to be right here, and this part you can't see because it's hidden within the frame. I made sure I took the long way around where I got stuck with the 543 last time. Literally didn't even take me a minute to drive around. I have no idea why I was in such a hurry. I love watching the 537's leaf springs articulate while I'm driving along. I'm a huge fan of all the detail that was put into the rear of this truck. Now again, the 537 was a prime mover used mostly for hauling tanks and rockets around. These massive leaf springs paired with high torque gave it a 120,000 pound tow capacity. Some models, the 537D, had 75 kilowatt generators mounted behind the cab just above the transmission. These were to power climate-controlled trailers that were needed to transport ballistic missiles. I didn't know that you needed to climate-control missiles. I mean, I guess it makes sense if it's like really cold. I don't really feel like researching missiles, not in the mood to end up on a watch list. I already go to lots of sketchy websites looking for these trucks, but yeah, it's cool to see, cool to know. The 537 we have in game, I believe, is a 537G. This was the first revision of the base 537 that basically had a higher load capacity fifth wheel plate and featured a rear winch to load trucks onto trailers. The winch was powered by a small drive shaft off the transfer case. The in-game truck has the spot for this drive shaft. There just isn't one there. The early 537s have 3 headlights, so we can tell that the in-game truck is a bit newer. The 537 is doing great. I mean, this isn't really much of a challenge for it at all. It's just driving along like any other truck would on favorable terrain. I got a little concerned when I realized my detour around the fallen trees was maybe only a one-way route, but the 537 climbed the ice shelf like it wasn't a big deal at all. With all the torque, this truck can conquer up to 30-degree grades like it's not even a big deal. So I've kinda talked about MAZ before in a previous video. MAZ has always been primarily a heavy-duty truck manufacturer. Not just military trucks, but semi-trucks and buses as well. They are also the biggest producer of transport erector launchers like the 543 in the world. A company called MZKT used to be a division of MAZ, and MZKT, also known as Velat, is the real-world company behind the in-game collab trucks, which I've also made a video on if you'd like to check that out. I got the 537 back to the garage no problem. Time to get the body repaired and take a closer look at the interior. I really like the 537's interior. It's cozy, it's simple, and it's easy to see out of. I mean, just look at how flat and utilitarian the dash is. I love the no-frills design of the defrost vents. They're huge and just pointed straight at the windshield. Just above the windshield is the lever to control the roof-mounted spotlight. And you can also see the escape hatch. This lever in the center of the back is for unlatching the hood. This tiny thing right here, I thought was a little coat hanger for the driver. That makes sense, right? Look how it's shaped. But no, this is actually the emergency shutdown lever. That seems like it's in a really precarious place, which I also find interesting because there were plenty of fail-safes built into this truck. The engine also has a fail-safe shutoff if it detects it's low on oil. It has the same manual windows as the 543. I really wanted to think these were cup holders because that'd be funny, and that's just what my American brain thought, but they're rifle holders. And I also thought the rifles would be stored with the stock on the ground and the barrel facing up. That way, they're more stable, and if one were to accidentally fire, well, then you just have a hole in your roof. But someone on Reddit who is in the German armed forces said that they would store them barrels down so that the soldiers wouldn't use them as ashtrays. I'm fairly certain this red circle on the dash is a dim light for night ops. You know, thinking tactically, if you're stationed out somewhere near enemy lines, you don't want to turn on the dome light and give away your position. So I believe this light is here to illuminate the rifle holders so you can get your gun out in the dark if you needed it. There are quite a few levers on the steering shaft. The one on the right side is definitely the gear selector, having reverse, neutral, first, second, and third. And the one on the left is for low gears. You have low, which would lock the differentials in the transfer case, a neutral position, then high gear, then what the Soviets called extreme forward. What is extreme forward? I don't know. That's just what it's labeled as in the declassified CIA document I found on the 537. The big lever coming out of the floor is just the parking brake, not a shifter. There's this little knob underneath the steering wheel. This is a manual fuel control, allowing the driver to adjust how much fuel is getting into the engine, or completely shut it off if it needs to be. I imagine this is both a failsafe in the event of a runaway diesel, since these trucks were operating in such harsh conditions, as well as just being able to manually lean out the engine depending on what mixture of diesel and kerosene the truck was running in relation to the outside temperature. Interestingly, there's only 3 kilometers on the odometer. I got excited thinking maybe the odometer actually tracked, but no, it doesn't. You can see the nice, funny-looking heater in the middle of the cab, and the engine in the back is modeled kinda correctly. It's definitely a V12, and they stay true to the actual engine design by getting this pattern on the valve cover right. Even though the 537 is first and foremost a utility vehicle, designed to haul immense loads through demanding and inhospitable terrain, I would dare say that it's a truck that I'd call downright beautiful. I've always been partial to cab-over and flat-faced trucks. The 537 is like the McLaren F1 of trucks to me. Everything about it is just right aesthetically. The cab is bulky, but it has a low profile. It's mid-engine with the bulky 38-liter somehow stuffed tightly behind the cab, and its wheels are enormous because it's not compromising. I adore this Soviet monster. These trucks entered the world at a time of significant strife and uncertainty, risen from a nation's desire to defend itself and secure its future. While the necessity for their construction may have been grim, they represented hope, strength, and pride to the people that sacrificed to bring them into this world. So like I said, people warned me before I started writing this video that finding information on both of these trucks was challenging, and they were 100% right. But like I said, I did manage to find a 393-page declassified CIA document of an English operator's manual for the 537, going over everything from basic maintenance, how to adjust the valve timing, what to do if it gets stuck in gear, ratios for diesel to kerosene for different temperatures, a full wiring diagram, how to store the truck, step-by-step instructions on how to take the suspension apart, what patterns you should rotate the tires in, how the cab is mounted on the frame. It goes on. I think you could damn near build your own with all the info in this thing. I combed through it the best I could, looking for interesting bits, but I could only stare at it for so long before my eyes started to hurt because of how badly it was photocopied. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to find something similar for the 543. The US was more preoccupied with what the 543 was carrying and tracking where they were, really, than the truck itself. Which, you know, the truck was carrying around nuclear warheads. I don't blame them. Despite this video not having quite as much information as I had hoped to get on these trucks, I still had fun making it, and I saw a lot of really interesting pictures, and I always love learning about history. So, if you enjoyed the video or learned something, please leave a like. It helps push the video in front of more people, helps the channel grow, and potentially puts me $1 closer to someday importing a Tatra T813 and buying a new graphics card because I don't think my PC can run Roadcraft. And now, a few comments to respond to. Alright, I can stop with the recording voice. The comments on the Avalanche video had me rolling. Lots of discourse there with me taking a polarizing stance on a truck. Real burp. Coco Pelion said that the Cybertruck is basically the modern day Avalanche. I do actually disagree. The Cybertruck is actually the modern day Hummer H1, except the H1 actually had the off-road capability to back it up. Think that's a weird take? Wait till I get around to my Hummer video and I'll elaborate. Casey Popper mentioned that they should make a topper for the Avalanche, and 2 people commented saying they do. Have you ever seen one of these? I haven't, but it's the ugliest thing I've ever seen. Phoenix256 said that his hill is that Tesla was never good. And you know what? I agree. Even at their best, they were still just rebadging Lotuses. Not Doppler said that my channel was about to pop off, and he was right. The Avalanche video blew up. The best performing SnowRunner video on my channel is a shitpost. Them's the breaks, I guess. Not really a response, but on the Avalanche video, there was a surprisingly long and civil conversation about the downsides of EVs and the upsides of hybrids. I don't know. I wanted to highlight that. I like the community I've fostered. It's nice to see people having civil disagreements instead of, you know, what normally goes on. Well, that's gonna do it for me, guys. I hope you enjoy the video, and I'll see you next time. Did I say 533? Dude, I'm gonna fuck all these numbers up. I think there was spit under my tongue and it clicked. That shit's annoying. But I'm not here to nitpick the damn add-ons. Now for the cock.